just you get to choose. Right? Like here's the scenario. The environment gives us something which can be perceived as negative, can be perceived as not working, can be perceived as problematic. The world's ending. But we get to choose to see it like that, or we get to choose to see it as an opportunity.
So clearly that it's my responsibility now to do that for other people. If I have information and, other people's success is my success and vice versa.
Because you know what? Like, the challenges or the roadblocks are the journey themselves.
There's no big things. It's all little things compounding on top of each other.
All right, welcome back to another episode of True Seekers with Coach Nick Davies and myself, Coach Josh Greco. We have Ryan Gottfredson joining us today. Ryan is a cutting-edge leadership development author, researcher, and consultant. He helps organizations vertically develop their leaders, primarily through a focus on mindset. Talk about what that means. Ryan is the Wall Street Journal and USA Today best-selling author of Success Mindsets, the key to unlocking greater success in your life, work, and leadership. And he is the author of the upcoming book, The Elevated Leader, Leveling Up Your Leadership Through Vertical Development. I want to talk more about that as well. He is also a leadership professor at the College of Business and Economics at California State University, Fullerton. Ryan, welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me. It's always great to be, I guess I'm making an assumption about you guys here, is you guys are coaches. I also do some coaching, is that I find that most coaches are people who have sought to elevate their life, have elevated their lives, and are now seeking to help others elevate their lives. And so I imagine that we can have a lot of fun talking about how we have elevated and how we can help others to elevate.
Absolutely. I love that.
I was about to say how me and Coach really go well and never jump in front of each other. What I would second that, Ryan, because I underscore that and also add on to that as well, because we're in that space. I find it so great working with and talking with other coaches, because we can get deeper quicker. And we can get to that juice much sooner. We can keep it flying. So I appreciate you sharing that.
Absolutely. And maybe that's a good place to start, because I think about my path to coaching, and it was so obvious to me that I started embodying these principles myself, and hey, I could teach them, I could coach them. I want to share this with other people. So maybe start there, Ryan, with your journey. And when was it that you realized, hey, this is something that I not only could do, but I love to do it. And this is something I'm passionate about.
And I'm going to stay a little bit more macro, and then I'm happy to talk about myself. But here's something that I've learned that I think you guys will find interesting, is that there's been a lot of research about personal development, right? So stemming from the field of developmental psychology, and developmental psychology as a field of study has been around since the 1880s. And most of the research, I would even say 90% of this research primarily focuses on child development, because we could see children develop right before our eyes. And what we've learned is that children's development is essentially a function of age. The older they get, as they go from infancy to adulthood, the more that they develop. But what's interesting is in the 1960s, there were a select few developmental psychologists that started to ask the question, do adults develop? And if so, do they go through different developmental stages similar to children? And what they found is that, yes, adults can develop, but what they've also found is that most adults don't develop. In fact, they've found that 64% of adults never develop beyond their level of development they enter adulthood with. And so I imagine when people become coaches, it usually is a signal that they have developed up at least to the next level of development. In fact, there's 3 primary adult development levels. And when we develop up a level, it's like we see the world in a completely different way. We're like, oh my goodness, the air up here is so great. I want to help other people get here. And so in my own journey, what I've come to realize is how I've spent most of my adult life was not at a very developed level. But there are certain things that have happened to me, certain things that I've done that has allowed me to elevate and improve in my development. And now, like you, I'm trying to help others do the same.
It was very aptly put. And I like the science behind it as well. And I'm wondering, those 3 stages of adult development, how might you describe that a little bit more in depth so we can understand what that is?
Yeah, what's helpful to realize is that there's two different forms of development. One form of development, and the form that we're used to, is called horizontal development. This is adding new knowledge and skills, right? So when we went to high school, when we went to college, we were downloading new knowledge and skills. And it's kind of like downloading an app onto an iPad, right? When I download a new app onto the iPad, that's great because it broadens my functionality. Right? I can now do more than what I could do previously. Like if I take an accounting class, I will download the accounting app on my iPad, and I can now balance my budget sheet, for example. And that's great, but this type of development, horizontal development, has a rather significant limitation. Right? If I download the accounting app onto my iPad, does that improve how effectively my iPad operates as a whole? No, not really, right? If we want to upgrade our iPad or who we are, we've got to turn to a different form of development that is called vertical development. And vertical development is all about not adding knowledge or skills, but upgrading our internal operating system so that we see and think differently and at a higher level than we did before. And so it's really vital for us to understand that there's these two forms of development. We usually focus on horizontal development, but what's really critical, and might argue the most critical aspect of our development, is this upgrading of our internal operating system. And that's what developmental psychologists have found that most adults don't do during adulthood.
Fantastic, Ryan. I would ask you as well, because as I was preparing for our time today, a word that I use, me and Coach use a lot, is mindset. And I was going to ask you, what is your definition of mindset? And for me, those two descriptions of the horizontal and the vertical, for me, plays directly into what I refer to perhaps strategy versus mindset. Everyone's asking for the strategy, give me new skills, give me new apps on my iPad, but it's like, hey, well, are you the right iOS to even allow that to be something you can even use? Would you please describe what you say as mindset? Am I on the right lines of tying those together and how you think about it?
No, for sure. You're spot on. So a base definition of mindsets that I like, that's fairly approachable, is the mental lenses that we wear that shape how we view the world around us. Now, we've all got mindsets. We've all got mental lenses that we're looking through. And what I've learned for myself, and also seeing it with the people that I work with, is that we all tend to think that the mental lenses that we are looking through are the best mental lenses to look through.
We wouldn't have them otherwise, right?
Yeah, we wouldn't have them otherwise. You're spot on. And so that's okay. But when we vertically develop, foundationally, what we are doing is we are changing the lenses that we look through. So let me give you a more technical definition of vertical development. Vertical development is elevating our ability to make meaning of our world in more cognitively and emotionally sophisticated ways. So the key there is making meaning of our world. So let me unpack this really quick. How would you say most people respond to constructive criticism?
Most people see it as an attack
Defensive.
and close down. Yeah.
Right? They get defensive, right? Because as you just said, Coach Nick, they make meaning of it as an attack.
Yeah.
Therefore, they get defensive, right? And that makes sense. But then we've got to ask ourselves, is how they are making meaning of constructive criticism, is that cognitively and emotionally sophisticated? I don't think so, right? The next level up might be an attack. And therefore, it kind of depends on who delivers it and how they deliver it. And that feels a little bit more cognitively and emotionally sophisticated. And I don't know about you, I think that the most cognitively and emotionally sophisticated people are the types of people who they make meaning of constructive criticism as an opportunity to learn and grow. Mm-hmm. And therefore, they're more likely to embrace it. And Don't get me wrong, it's not easy to get there. It does take cognitive and emotional sophistication because we have to get to the mental space and even emotional space where we are good with being told that we are bad. And it's just not easy to get there, but it is more cognitively and emotionally sophisticated. So hopefully just in that example, you can see how there's different levels of how we can make meaning with different levels of cognitive and emotional sophistication. Does that make sense?
Oh, Crystal, I love this space. And I had a client said to me a few weeks ago about, it's like, well, how do you do this communication thing? Because we're talking about him in Laird and his organization managing up or leading up and leading down. And I said to him that you've got to think about your communication from that cognitive and emotional superior place or elevated space, excuse me, a better language, is that I always think about it when I'm communicating, I'm doing it in a way that can be most gently received. So I open the biggest opportunity for creating a meaning that's most useful for that person. And if I'm receiving it, I'm always doing it in a way that is the most open, that I could take the best thing that allows me to grow. And so I really appreciate you sharing that, because that's some extra layers for me in that thought process. Beautiful.
Perfect. And it's not just with constructive criticism, right? We could think about it in terms of failure. How do we see failure? Do you see failure as something to avoid, or as an opportunity to learn and grow? And that's effectively the difference between a fixed mindset and a growth mindset. Or how do we see being wrong? Do we see that as an indication that we're not very smart? Or do we see it as an opportunity to expand kind of our knowledge base? And that's the difference between a closed and an open mindset. And so when we understand this, and connect vertical development to mindsets, is what we've got to understand is that there are less cognitively and emotionally sophisticated mindsets, and there are more cognitively and emotionally sophisticated mindsets. Now, what I've learned for myself, because I've had to come to the realization that I haven't always had very good mindsets, is that when we possess the more negative or less cognitively and emotionally sophisticated mindsets, these are justifiable because they're generally self-protective. Yeah. They're protecting us, right? From failure, from being wrong, from having problems, from getting passed up. But while they might be self-protective and while they might feel good, they ultimately may be holding us back from being the value creator that we want to be.
Self-protective really resonates with me. I've been thinking a lot of the ego, right? That's what I call it, as something within us or without us, or however you think of it, that is, there's certain things that it protects us from, or thinks that it is, right? But what's happening is it's preventing that increased sophistication from actually occurring. And it's the recognition of it, I think, that it is the superpower. And right, that's the awareness of it. Everything starts with the awareness of it. And then once you recognize it for what it is, then it can open up this other opportunity to increase the sophistication.
Yeah, let me give you an example that'll hopefully make this come to life. So, and I don't know, I'll be interested to know if either of you can resonate with this. So, my freshman year of college, I moved away from home, was going to college, and I wanted to become a medical doctor. That was kind of my goal. So I signed up for the Weeder pre-med chemistry class, or Weeder pre-med courses, and one of those was a chemistry course. And it was actually taught by a guy who invented sticky notes at 3M. So it's this brilliant dude who's teaching this college chemistry class, and I happen to be in this class. And at the end of the semester, I got the lowest grade I had ever received. So I'd gotten a C. I had never gotten a C before. And so to me, that was a failing grade. And the way that I made sense of this was what I told myself was, well, chemistry doesn't come naturally to you, and you're going to need chemistry to become a medical doctor. I guess you're not cut out to be a medical doctor, and you should change your major. And so that's what I did. That made complete sense to me in the moment. And so that's what I did. I changed my major, and I gave up on my dreams of becoming a medical doctor. Well, fast forward 15-ish years, what I come to realize, I now start to learn about fixed and growth mindsets. And I come to see that what I was doing as a freshman in college was I had a fixed mindset. where the mental lens that I was looking through would just essentially said, if you fail at something, or if something doesn't come naturally to you, that means that you're a have-not and you can't become a have. And I now look back and I kick myself because now I know about a growth mindset. And I just realized that if I had a growth mindset, that C grade, may have been an indication that I wasn't doing so good, but I wouldn't have given up. Rather, I would have believed that I could go from being a have not to becoming a have. I've just got to put in the work, right? In that moment, it was easier for me to let go of my dream of becoming a medical doctor than it was for me to evaluate whether or not I have good study habits, which I know I didn't have as a freshman in college. So with a fixed mindset, I gave up. I think if I had a growth mindset, I would have buckled down. I would have reevaluated my study habits, and I would have persevered more fully towards my dream of becoming a medical doctor. And so that's something I could look back on. Man, I had a mindset that made sense. It was self-protective, but it ultimately limited me from stepping into my dreams.
I'm actually somewhat grateful that you may have had a fixed mindset back then, because we'd be talking about patella tendons today instead of coaching principles.
It's interesting that you say the word patella tendon, because I grew up with a knee disease that's called Osgood-Schlatters disease, which affected me because I played basketball, and anyways, I always had to wear this strap around my knee. And anyways,
my brother had that too. Actually, I'm familiar with that. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So very interesting. So, Ryan, have you noticed, since you became aware of fixed and growth mindset, like how else has that applied? You mentioned something right after the intro that I wrote down, that you've practiced some things to level up. And I'd love to know what some of those things are, to learn more about you, but also for our audience to hear like what they might be able to practice to implement some of these things and level up themselves.
Yeah. One of the things that we've learned about vertical development is vertical development, going from one vertical altitude to another, generally, and if not always, requires what we would call a heat experience. A heat experience can be something that happens to us. It could be also something we create within ourselves. For me, there was a heat experience that helped facilitate my process. So I carried around these rather negative mindsets. I did my Ph.D. at Indiana University. I did my dissertation on leadership. I took a job at Cal State Fullerton. And I was there for a couple of years, and it was okay. But I had this itch to do consulting. And so I took a leave of absence from my university and took a job with Gallup to do some consulting. And after about 10, 11 months in that role, I kind of felt during that time I was really pigeonholed into a role that I didn't love. And I was trying to kind of burst out of that role. And it felt like the organization just wasn't allowing me to do that. And after several months of effectively complaining to my manager got on the phone with me one day, and she essentially said, "I don't think this is working out. We're going to let you go." And I was fired. Like, I never thought I would be fired. And I was just, to me, I had taken this consulting role thinking this is going to be the rest of my career, is with Gallup or in the consulting world somewhere. And now it's like derailed immediately. And to me, this was a heat experience. Now, people don't always grow from every heat experience that occurs. But for me, what this allowed me to do, because I decided to go back to the university, and I had a few months between when I was laid off and when I would start back up at the university. And so I began to dive more fully into my leadership research, which actually was focused on mindsets. And I spent 3 months doing the deepest dive into the academic literature on mindsets that I've ever come across. And what I came to find out is there's different mindsets that are out there. And as I'm studying these different mindsets, I'm coming to the realization that I don't have very positive mindsets. And so then I went about the work of shifting my mindsets. But I would say what I learned from this experience was really two things that I'll point out here. Is one, I had a heat experience, which helped me out. Two, the first step in vertical development, beyond having the heat experience, is deepening our self-awareness. We have got to awaken. Now, one of the challenges when it comes to mindsets, from what I see with the organizations I work with, is that, yeah, mindset, everybody has mindsets and mindsets are out there, but most people have no clue what mindsets are out there, and therefore they are unable to evaluate the quality of their current mindsets. And so something that I've created is a mindset framework and a mindset assessment that helps people to awaken and evaluate the quality of their mindsets. And so for me, once I realized I didn't have very positive mindsets, it was only then that I could then do something about it. So I feel like half of the battle of the vertical development journey is awakening to the quality of our current mindsets.
And how do you do that, Ryan? Is there a technique? Is there, like, when there's a difference between just sleepwalking through it and then what? Like, what is it? Like, how do we get our arms around that?
Well, and this is where let me ask you this question. I'm just interested in your response, and there's really no right or wrong answer, and I'm going to ask it in somewhat of a polarizing way. Do you think that shifting our mindsets is easy or difficult?
I would say with practice, it can become easy, but I'd say while we're in it, right, it's most difficult for us to do it because we're in it. So I'd say difficult.
Yeah. So a bit of a trick question, because I would never say it's easy to shift our mindsets, but what I will say is it's easier than most people generally think. So part of the process of shifting our mindsets is identifying what mindsets are out there, like fixed and growth, closed and open, prevention, promotion, inward and outward. These are some examples of different mindsets. And so if people want to dive into these and even take my mindset assessment, they could go to my website at ryangottfredson.com. There's an assessment there. And then I've had over 30,000 people take the mindset assessment. And the results are essentially, how do my mindsets, the quality of my current mindsets, stack up relative to these other 30,000 people? And that gives us rather objective information. And so that type of awareness is incredibly helpful, because it helps us to give a sense of where I'm currently at and where I need to go. Well, then the next challenge then is, once we've awakened, is how do we move the needle on our mindsets? How do we go from one mindset to the other? And what's helpful to recognize is that our mindsets are specific types of neural connections in our mind, right? And if we take just fixed and growth mindsets, we all have a fixed mindset neural connection, and we all have a growth mindset neural connection. And for most people, one of these mindset neural connections is stronger than the other. That means when one is stronger than the other, that is the default mode by which we process information. So let's just say I have a fixed mindset. That's going to be the default mode in which I'm going to process my world. That doesn't mean that I can't take on a growth mindset. I've just got to be really intentional about doing so. But the process of shifting our mindsets is we need to recognize that these neural connections are a lot like our muscles. The more we use them, the stronger they become. So that means that we need to intentionally exercise our positive mindset neural connections, like a growth mindset. And to the degree to which we do so on a regular and consistent basis is the more that we're going to take on that growth mindset, right? We can't expect to go to the gym once and become strong. It's got to be routine effort. But here's the thing about mindsets is, I don't know about you, but when I hit the gym, which I did like on January 2nd with everybody else in the world, is I spent an hour at the gym. Well, to work out my growth mindsets, I don't need to spend an hour. In fact, research suggests is I need to spend just about 5 minutes a day activating and exercising my growth mindset neural connection. And in a matter of weeks, we're gonna see and feel significant differences in our mindsets. And so some of the exercises that we can engage in include reading books, watching videos, having discussions with others, engaging in positive self-talk, journaling, meditation. These are all exercises that have been proven to help people shift their mindsets if done repeatedly over time.
Love that. We're going to put that list in the show notes. And I think maybe we've identified a little preview clip as well, because I think that's the powerful stuff right there, right? Some people know those things and maybe are even just going through the motions with some of them, but 5 minutes a day, wow, like to know, that's all it takes to, we don't got to work out for an hour like we do in the gym, right? So that's good to know. And we want to share that with the listeners here.
Well, let me give you a quick example that demonstrates this. So there was a research study where they brought in groups of people and they split them up into 3 groups. One group, they didn't have them do anything. That was our control group. They had another group write down 2 paragraphs about their goals and aspirations. And they had the third group write down 2 paragraphs about their duties and responsibilities. And then what they did is they took a member from each of these 3 groups and put them into one group. And they tracked the degree to which that individual engaged with the group in terms of commenting, and also the degree to which they put forward more and better ideas. And what they found is that out of these 3 groups of people, the group that wrote down 2 paragraphs about their goals and aspirations were much more engaged and produced better ideas than the other 2 groups. And that's because this intervention of writing 2 paragraphs activated and stimulated their promotion mindset neuroconnections, whereas the group who wrote about their duties and responsibilities, that activated and strengthened their prevention mindsets. And so when they were able to activate those, they stepped into their environment with a much more positive mindset and therefore operated at a higher level. And so that's an example of how we could just take journaling 2 paragraphs before a meeting that will activate certain mindsets, and then we will perform at a higher level.
Super cool. I love it. And there's so much cool stuff there, and like so many little triggers going off for me in my journey and how I think about it. Biggest distinction I'll take just from the last few minutes, Ryan, I think the last previous point was the default programming of even having one propensity to go to the fixed or the growth. I really want to underscore that, because some people listening and watching might be thinking, well, it's easy for some people. Well, that's how it is for me. And of course, in itself is a fixed mindset. But the starting point is just that, right? And so go back to your chemistry and studying that. It's like, okay, well, as soon as you go down that road, I think it's what it was, chemistry, if I remember, then you're either gonna, whatever you start, you continue to do, right? It has that effect. And so if you can just remind yourself that there's always a choice to be, maybe the default is that, okay, so if I can lean into that perspective, I'm going to get a different outcome. That's pretty cool. And I just want to close the loop on something I think I heard earlier. What are the 3 different levels? So it's the heat experience to start, like a big emotional experience, opportunity to go to that next level. Could you just list out what those 3 different levels are of that adult development?
Yeah, so there's 3 different levels in this vertical development journey. And at each level, our body is programmed differently. It's programmed to fulfill different needs. And you'll see the differences between these 3 different levels. So at the base level, where all adults essentially enter adulthood with, and so whether we're here or not, we should be able to relate to this. But at the first level, our body's needs are safety, comfort, and belonging. Right? When we're at this level, we like to join and identify with groups or tribes that will help us to feel safe, feel comfortable, and like we belong. So these groups or tribes can be families, friend groups, religious groups, political groups, social groups, etc. And when we join these groups, we don't want to take charge. We're kind of like, I don't want to take the charge here, but I'll do what you tell me to do, provided you keep me safe, comfortable, and feeling like I belong. So that's the first level. Does that make sense?
Crystal, yep, crystal clear.
Okay. And that's where 64% of all adults operate at that level. The next level up, we shift our needs. The needs that we become programmed to achieve at the second level are to stand out, advance, and get ahead. In fact, and this is so different from the first level, because at that first level, we want safety, comfort, and belonging. But at the second level, we're now willing to be unsafe, uncomfortable, and not belong in order to stand out, advance, and get ahead. And one of the shifts that's made as we go from level 1 to level 2 is we move from being a dependent thinker, you just tell me what to do, to being an independent thinker. We actually become willing to push back against our tribe's beliefs. We develop our own set of beliefs. And most people who level up to this level, they want to become leaders because they're like, I have my own good ideas. I want to run with these good ideas. And in fact, I can use the Mind 1.0 people or these level 1 people to help me stand out, advance, and get ahead. So what we find is that 35% of all people get to this second level, and 85% of executives operate at this level. So that's level 2. Does that make sense? And the difference between level 1 and level 2 there?
Absolutely. And just to clarify, it's 64% in people's entirety of their life. They never get above that. And that's what the numbers show, and the same, and 35% for second level. Okay.
Yep, correct. And that means if you're doing the math, there's 1% across all adults that get to the third level. And there's 8% of executives. And at this third level, again, the needs of our body change. We no longer want to stand in. That's kind of the first level needs, is to stand in. We don't want to stand out. That's the second level needs. At this third level, our needs are to contribute, add value, and lift others. In fact, we're willing to not stand in and not stand out in order to contribute, add value, and lift others. And this is you could probably sense this, but one of the basic distinctions between this level and the 2 levels below it is when we operate in those first 2 levels, our focus is ultimately on ourselves, us standing in or us standing out. It's only when we get to that third level that now we become focused not on ourselves, but something bigger than ourselves, contributing, adding value, and lifting others. So that's all external to us. And again, only 1% of adults and only 8% of executives get there. And I'd like to think that if this framework becomes more well-known, and if we can get a better sense of where we're currently at, where we want to go, that we can increase those percentages and get more people up in that third level.
And just by getting the information out there. Right, I'm curious, is it something like where a switch is flipped to get to that place, or is that the practice of it? Like what graduates somebody from the one level to the next? And then do you ever, can you ever experience yourself going back or falling back into patterns, and how do you snap out of that?
Yeah, great question. And so one of the things we talked about is heat experiences. We've talked about deepening our awareness in terms of, okay, what level am I at, or what are the quality of my mindsets, and then shifting our mindsets, right? So there's a natural question that arises as we talk about these 3 different levels. And the natural question that arises is, okay, well, what level am I at? Which I think is a very good question, but I think the question can be a little bit limited, because I don't know about you, but I see all 3 levels in myself. Right? And so I think a better question to actually ask is not what level am I at, although that's a very powerful question. A better question might be, what is my center of gravity? What percentage of my time am I spending at these different levels? So to your point, is what we do recognize is people can shift from one level to the other. And there's a variety of reasons for that. But I do think we all have a default mode, a mode we have a tendency to fall back to. And so I've got another assessment on my website, a vertical development assessment that's designed to help people identify their center of gravity. And I was working with a group of Vistage leaders a couple of weeks ago and had them take my vertical development assessment. And of these Vistage leaders, so these are CEOs of small to medium-sized companies, if I remember right, there was 12 in the group, and 10 of them were identified as operating primarily from that second level. There was 2 that were identified as operating primarily at that first level. And after I did a workshop with this group, one of these CEOs at that first level calls me up and he says, "I don't agree with your assessment." I said, "Okay, that's fine. But do you mind if we just kind of explore it a little bit?" And he said, "Sure, because I do want to develop as a leader and I want to see where this comes from." So we dove into his findings. And what we identified was that there are certain elements of his life and business that he does really well at. So, for example, he's more sophisticated when it comes to taking risks and making strategic decisions with his business. But what we also came to realize is he is incredibly self-protective when it comes to his relationships with others. You know, he very adamantly said, "I hate conflict. I avoid conflict at all costs. You could even ask my wife." Like he kind of goes on and on. And so he identifies that there are some aspects to his life he's more sophisticated, but there's other aspects of his life that are less sophisticated. And how that kind of balanced out for him is he was slightly, you know, in terms of the assessment on that first level, where surely there are times and instances he can operate from that second level, but his default is that first level. And so now that he's aware of this, he's now, hopefully with some help from me, empowered to do something about it.
I love it. I love assessments. I love because it starts with that awareness. You know, we talked about that awareness. You also know what's hard, difficult to change mindsets. My thought on that is also that it's oftentimes just realizing it's there is half the work, right? It's like,
Yeah.
it's like working on a big project. Oh, I can't believe I've got all this work to do. I've got all this. I don't want to do the plan. I just want to get to work. But once you've done the plan, you realize the actual execution of it is pretty simple. But you have to be aware of seeing it out there. So I love to pull this all together with that awareness piece, right? Because if you don't see it, then you can't see it. You don't know it's there, right?
Yeah. Yep.
And so that the awareness is so important. I'd love to spin this into some of the other work that I believe that you've done, Ryan, working with big organizations and big leaderships. And so I've spent a long time in the corporate world myself prior to coaching, and it's so intriguing to me, and talk to as much as you can or can't. And obviously that's your prerogative, but how do you find sharing the concepts and coach always comes back to what can we actually do? What's the action point? Because that's where we get our results from. You know, no new action, no new results, of course. When sharing this, working with large companies on scale to change this culturally and understand these paradigms, what have you seen that really helps it bed in and stay part of that, especially in a large organization? What are your thoughts and views on that?
Honestly, the thing that seems to help the organization absorb this information and take action on it is, and there's probably no surprise, is contingent upon the CEOs and the executive team's ability to engage and do the work themselves. Right? Let me give you an example. I'm working with an organization. They're in the banking industry, and the head of HR reached out to me and they said, "We want you to do some work with our organization. Part of the work we want you to do with our executive team. We've got some other workshops we want you to do." And I said, "Okay, great. I'd love to do this." And so we set it up, and we had the date set for me to go and visit the company in person and to work with the executive team. And so we had that set out, and I said, "Okay, well, this is great. I think we're all set up, but I'd actually really love to meet the CEO before we do this workshop." So they set up this phone call with the CEO, and I met with the CEO, and he said, "I am so glad that you're going to help work with our executive team. They can really use your help." And immediately I'm like, what does he mean by they, right? And I said, "Well, okay, this is great. Well, I'm looking forward to meeting this and meeting you and the executive team." And I said, I have a couple of assessments that we've invited the executive team to take, and all of them have taken it except for you. Would you mind taking it? Taking these assessments?" And he says, "No, I don't need to take those assessments. I'm good. I don't need any development, but my team sure needs some development. So I'm actually not going to be involved in the workshop that you're doing here in person. It's just going to be with my executive team." And I'm like, "No." And so I end up, this plays out where this CEO is not involved in the workshop that I did with the executive team. And the executive team was great. Don't get me wrong, they've got some opportunities for development. But what was interesting is that the whole time we're having this conversation is they're all saying to me, "I sure wish our CEO was in here." Right? Our CEO keeps holding us back. Our CEO, right? That's the type of language that they kept saying. So I'm still continuing to do work with this organization. I do think that we are making progress in many areas, but I do think we've been limited because of the lack of CEO's involvement. And I wish I could say that this is like an anomaly. But the reality is that I would say this type of a dynamic probably happens with a third of the organizations that I work with, where the CEO just does not get engaged or very engaged at all because they think that they don't need development. They think they're good where they're at. And, there's some ego, some other things. The other thing that I'll add here, and I'll bring in a topic that we haven't talked about, is for many of these leaders, when I engage in coaching calls with them around vertical development, it is common for me to hear something like this. And I've heard this now from multiple CEOs where they say, "I try not to let anyone know this, but deep down, I'm very insecure." And one of the things that I've learned through those experiences, as well as deeper research into vertical development, is that there is a connection between the trauma that we have lived through in our lives and our vertical altitude. Let me phrase that slightly differently. The more trauma one experiences in their lives, and that can mean a wide variety of things, the more self-protective they become, and the less cognitively and emotionally sophisticated they operate with. And the thing about this that I think, the reason why I bring this up, because it leads to a really beautiful message, and that is ultimately our vertical development journey is about healing. It's about healing our minds and our hearts. So to come back to my story a little bit is, I feel like I was able to go from that level 1 to level 2 by getting fired, having a heat experience, learning about mindsets, awakening to my mindsets, and then working on shifting my mindsets. And I would say that got me to level 2. And I would still say I'm still working on getting to level 3. But there's another thing that happened to me just a couple of years ago. And I was reading a book. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, but it's a book called The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk. And it's about trauma. And in this book, he highlights different trauma therapies. And one of these therapies is a therapy modality called EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. And the research on it essentially says this is the most effective therapy modality for treating trauma. And it kind of sounded a little, I don't know, hocus pocus to me, but the results are things that you can't refute. And so I actually reached out to a trauma therapist and I said, "Hey, I don't have any trauma in my background, but I'm wondering, I'd love to just experience this. And I'm wondering if it can help me out." And this trauma therapist essentially says, "Yeah, everybody's got mental blocks and this will help you work through mental blocks that you have." And I said, "Oh, that's awesome. Let's do it." And very soon into my therapy journey, which I never met with a therapist before, I came to discover that I had trauma in my upbringing. That what I realized is that while my parents were always there for me physically, they were rarely there for me emotionally. that effectively I was emotionally neglected as a child. And I've spent the last 2 years working on myself with this therapist, trying to heal and literally rewire my brain from the effects of that trauma. And I would say that I've grown more in the last 2 years than I have in all of my adulthood put together, which I already felt like I had done some development. So I feel like I have been taking that next step to try to get to that third level. I think I'm spending a greater percentage of time there. I surely have got some work to do. But that's another example of how of a belief that I've come to have as going through this process, both for myself as helping others with it, is that the deeper we go inward, the greater our ability to elevate. And for some people like myself, we may need some therapy to help us in the process. I don't think everybody needs that, but I've surely found it to be a beneficial part of my journey.
Really, really glad that you're sharing that, Ryan. It goes to what Coach Nick said earlier about, some people perceive that it's easy for others, or, here we are almost a full hour into a podcast episode with somebody who's, who I would describe as very polished and professional, and for you to be able to share that and be vulnerable yourself, like that is very empowering, and I appreciate that. So thank you for sharing that. And that really resonates with me big time with my discovery of meditation and some internal practices over these last couple of years. It's wild how much is there when we look for it and when we seek it. And it's really, it's almost unbelievable how much the world around us changes the more that we look internal within ourselves and begin to see why things have unfolded the way that they have in our lives. And then to treat them as blessings, even though looking back on it, they were traumas, right? Like some of this terminology and language, it's all for us. It's all for our development. And looking at it that way, it's like, well, what else can we discover? Like how deep can I go here? Like, will it end? And it really never does. It really never does. There's always more there, which is, another crazy aspect of this. So thank you very much for sharing that. I really appreciate that.
For sure. Yeah. Vertical development is a lifelong journey. So I don't think we can ever be done vertically developing, but the more we vertically develop, as we vertically develop, we enhance our capacity to be a positive influence in the world around us or within our spheres of influence. And I think I'd like to think that everybody wants to be a more positive influence to those around them. And so to me, it's maybe the best investment we can make.
Mm.
So hire coaches or therapists to help us out, right, Josh? Right?
Exactly. Yeah. That's why we're here, right? To elevate other people's games. Yeah. And a lot of what we do begins externally with business goals or things that we'd like to accomplish. And it's all about the navigation of those limiting belief systems and maybe even some traumas along the way. So this totally resonates. Ryan, as we begin to come to a close, I would love for you to share. You have a new book coming out. Like, how might this relate to what we've talked about today, the conversation, and then what might people get or gain from engaging with your book?
Yeah, for sure. So I've got a couple of books. The first book that I wrote is Success Mindset, which dives into these mindset frameworks that we've discussed. And in all honesty, I wish I could go back in time and write that book second. But I just learned about those first, and then I learned about vertical development. So my most recent book is called The Elevated Leader, Level Up Your Leadership Through Vertical Development, which is all about explaining what vertical development is, these 3 different levels, and then how we go about the process of elevating. And then I think the Success Mindsets book is one way that we could focus on elevating in terms of our vertical development. So really, we've covered there's a lot more depth than what we've talked about, but in this conversation, we've covered some of the key ideas across both of those books.
Yeah. Love it. Thank you very much for sharing. And usually at this point too, what Coach Nick and I do is ask for some sort of takeaway or reinforcement of a principle. I mean, there's so much here today. We're going to have some fun with choosing just one here, but Ryan, we'll have you go last. Maybe we'll have you bring us home. So I'll turn it to Coach Nick and just see what was a good reinforcement for you today, Coach, or what was a principle that was an aha or a good rediscovery today from our conversation.
Yeah, so much great stuff. Thank you very much, Ryan. Obviously doing some great work, helping a lot of people, and that's what it's all about. And that transcendence experience is what the word that came to me, that level 3 is that transcendence and just kind of going above, thinking about the greater good. And that vulnerability in that CEO example, if that guy comes to the table and went, I'll be part of this, I'll be there. And if he's in that situation, he's being vulnerable, everyone sees that, he gets the growth, they get the growth, we supercharge it all. And I wrote down in big capital letters, lifelong process. And you said something similar to that a couple of minutes ago. It's like, this never stops. That's the thing I want to get through to people, and whatever type of coaching, therapy experience it is. It's not like, I hit that and I'm done. Like, I get a coach for a week and my business is fixed forever. Or I'm in this therapy and I'm good. It's like, it's never stops. And to your point, Coach, there's always something, right? And when we work with our clients, you think, oh goodness, what is there to work on? And well, it used to be that way, but now I know so well that wherever you are, there's always something. There's always a place to go, and it's never-ending journey. And that's why it's the journey of mastery, because it's just the journey. We'll never get there. And so, thank you, Ryan, for sharing all that. Those are the things that really jumped out for me, and that distinction. I think about that place where, like, you get to choose where you want to go towards, and if you feel like that it's not like, okay, that's fine for other people to say, but not for me. I'm different. Like, it's tough for me. It's harder for me. I got this, got that. But by its very nature, those are the things that's preventing you. And by shining some sort of light, and that having someone, a coach or even just a friend or a colleague, whoever, just about to be the mirror for you so you can see it, changes the game.
Appreciate that, Coach. Yeah, there's mirrors all around us, right? That's how I began to think about my external world, with what it means for my internal world. And that's my takeaway, is just what Ryan shared at the end there. I think, man, to think of, to be able to share that you're working on traumas, or that's such a key part of, that's the reframe, moving from 2.0 to 3.0 by way of that, right? So maybe the desire to get there and has led to the search of, well, what's preventing me? And then you discover all these things of like, oh my gosh, that's there and that's there and that's there. And it's like a whole web to untangle, but that's the superpower, is recognizing it for what it is, that it's here to serve us, and then making sense of like, well, how do I navigate that now that I'm aware of it? And where does the healing opportunity come in for me? And then just naturally you watch your external world just reflect new things, new people, new experiences, so that you have that opportunity to be level 3, right? Contribute, advance, lift others up. So that's my takeaway today. Love it. Thank you very much, Ryan. And for you, bring us home. A final comment, a principle, something that you've gleaned from our conversation today.
Well, yeah. So Coach Nick said a word that I think is worth talking about. And the word was vulnerability. So I talked earlier about how we can make meaning of things at different levels of cognitive and emotional sophistication, right? So I don't know about you, but I would say, and this is also me in my past, I would say most people make meaning of vulnerability as a sign or a signal of weakness. And that makes sense because it's self-protective, but it's also not very cognitively and emotionally sophisticated. It's much more cognitively and emotionally sophisticated to see and make meaning of vulnerability as a sign or a signal of strength. Yeah. And what I find interesting is I do 360-degree assessments with executives focused on vertical development. And I've got a question in that assessment, which is, and so this is usually somebody evaluating the leader. And the question is, to what degree does this leader, is this leader good at being vulnerable? So the question is not, is this leader great at being vulnerable? It's, is this leader good at being vulnerable? And across all of the items that I measure, that is the one that executives always score the lowest on. When I have a group of executives, not that everybody scores low, but that's the one that has the lowest average. That what I find in organizations is business leaders really struggle to be vulnerable. But vulnerability, to Coach Nick's point, and this is why I loved what he said, is that is required for vertical development, right? So that brings us back to a couple of points, additional points that we've already talked about. Is one, The deeper we go inward, the greater our capacity for vertical development. And it all starts with awareness. That's the first step. And when we allow for that awareness, I think what we're doing is we're allowing that vulnerability, or at least the opportunity for vulnerability to come through.
Love it. Ryan, thank you so much. This has been a pleasure. I enjoyed it. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Thanks for such a great conversation.
Thank you for watching another episode of Truth Seekers. We appreciate your interaction, so please comment, like, subscribe to YouTube, Apple Podcasts or Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. And if you want more, check out some of our links to our masterclass, The Achiever's Mindset, and come join our LinkedIn group. And what do you want to see more of? Remember, we're here to share the simple secrets of successful. So help us do that. What do you want to see? What do you want to see more of? Thanks, and see you again next time.